Hello everyone and welcome to the second part of Making a Home in Silvertown, a guided walk in association with Newham Heritage Festival and the Access and Engagement team at Birkbeck University of London. My name is Matt and I'm your tour guide for this sequence of 3 videos that lead you on a historic guided walk around Silvertown, one of East London's most dynamic neighbourhoods. This part of the walk might take about half an hour, depending on how often you stop to enjoy the scenery. You should be able to follow it without problems if you haven't done the first section, but please do check that one out if you can. It includes some broader background about Silvertown, as well as advice on getting around. This is the route we'll follow in this section, beginning at the top left and finishing at the top right. If you're doing it as a separate unit, this is set up so you can begin and end at Pontoon Dock Station on the Docklands Light Railway. Alternatively, if you're doing all 3 sections in one long walk, you can pick up where you left off last time and finish ready for the last leg of our journey. If you've just completed the first section, you're at the junction where Royal Crest Avenue meets North Woolwich Road. Please just wait there a moment so others can catch up with you. If you're doing this leg as a separate walk, you should be at Pontoon Dock, Docklands Light Railway Station. What you need to do is this. Just head west along North Woolwich Road and you'll soon find the junction with Royal Crest Avenue. Now that everyone's together, head south along Royal Crest Avenue, which then tacks around to the right. You'll come to Corinthian Square, a grassy area where several roads meet. You're now in the middle of Royal Wharf, a residential and retail development covering 15.2 hectares of riverside real estate. Construction is still ongoing on western parts of the site, but when the project's complete, it's estimated that the development will house about 10,000 people. Royal Wharf is a new name. The site was previously Minaco Wharf, and until its recent regeneration it had lain derelict since the 1990s. Before that it was used by Shell for storing and refining oil. From the late 19th to early 20th centuries, though, the neighbourhood was home to the factory that you see here, the works of the chemical manufacturer Brunner Mond. At our next stop we'll learn about an event at this chemical works that made a terrible impact on Silvertown's history. At the southeast corner of Corinthian Square, follow Royal Crest Avenue to the west, then turn left and walk south down Schooner Road. You'll see a small park on your right. Where the road forms a T-junction, a path heads across the park. On the opposite side of the park, look for this. This is the Silvertown War Memorial. It used to stand on North Woolwich Road, but as part of the Royal Wharf redevelopment, it's been moved closer to the centre of the site. 3 of its faces are inscribed. One inscription is to the memory of men from the Brunner Mond works who died in military service during the First World War. Another face has a similar message about the Second World War. The third is dedicated to those who died in the 1917 Silvertown Explosion. Before the First World War, Brunner Mond principally made soda crystals at this site, but the government commandeered the factory and its staff for purifying the explosive TNT for the war effort. This was despite Brunner Mond emphasising the danger of doing this in a built-up, partly residential area. On Friday 19th January 1917, after most of the workers had left for the evening, a fire accidentally started and spread towards the 50 tons of TNT that were kept on site. When the fire met the explosives, there was an enormous blast so loud it could be heard on the Sussex coast. Buildings were levelled over a wide radius, including mills to the north by the Royal Victoria Dock, where clouds of blazing flour danced into the air. At the gasworks across the Thames on the Greenwich Peninsula, the top of a gas holder was ripped open, sending a plume of fire high into the night sky. To give a sense of the devastation, this is the local fire station on North Woolwich Road before the blast, so evidently a robust structure, but this is the fire station afterwards. The effect on local housing, where many families would be relaxing for the evening, was also devastating. This is a row of firemen's houses near the fire station. They're typical of housing in the area at the time, brick terraces with no gardens to speak of. 73 people were killed by the explosion, 69 of them more or less instantly. That included 18 men on site at the chemical works. It's only thanks to the time of day, with most locals having left work for the evening, that the death toll wasn't far higher. Hundreds more were injured and thousands made homeless. There was a major effort to care for survivors of the explosion. So this image shows injured children being cared for at a temporary infirmary in Barking Road Wesleyan Methodist Church, which is in Newham but some way north of Silvertown. The church also fed families displaced by the explosion. In the months that followed, the government organised a huge rebuilding project to replace lost housing. This was done very quickly and was more or less complete by the end of that summer. So look at the names on the monument and see if you can find Andrea Angel. He was the head chemist at the works, a chemistry lecturer at Oxford who had volunteered to work at the factory to help the war effort. He played a brave role in fighting the fire and was killed by the blast. His courage was posthumously recognised with an Edward Medal, the equivalent of the modern George Cross. However, many details about the disaster's causes were kept secret by the government. This allowed rumours to spread, some of them suggesting that the explosion resulted from sabotage. One of these conspiracy theories, we might call it today, is that Andrea Angel was an enemy agent. This gossip seems largely to be inspired by the fact that his first name just sounded a bit foreign. In fact, one of his grandfathers had been Italian. Italy, of course, was on the same side as Britain during the First World War. Perhaps this is a reminder that making a new home in Silvertown or elsewhere has not always been easy. So retrace your steps through the park, then turn right and head south. You'll emerge onto a beautiful stretch of riverside. Turn left and follow the Thames downstream along Royal Wharf Walk. This photo, taken from across the Thames, shows the riverside where you're now walking. The lighter coloured building towards the left is Millennium Mills by the Royal Victoria Dock, some way back from the river. The empty space by the river and in front of Millennium Mills is where the Brunner Mond plant used to stand. At this point in the 1970s, there had been very little building on the site, even decades later. The large factory in the middle of the image belonged to a company called PR Chemicals, and the location is rather different now, as we're about to see. Continue east along the riverside path and you'll enter Thames Barrier Park. You're now standing on the footprint of the PR Chemicals factory. Owing to all the toxic byproducts resulting from operations at the factory, the soil here was heavily polluted and had to go through a rigorous cleansing process that took years before the area could be made into a park. If you like, have a wander around the park and take a moment to appreciate its novel features. When it opened in 2000, this was the first new London park for 50 years. It's also the first London park to be designed with this rather stylised, postmodern ethos. There's no real attempt to imitate nature in the design here, but there's a strong sense of inventiveness and fun. One striking feature is the Sunken garden, seen here in the middle of the park. This gives shelter to the plants down there and helps them to survive bad weather. But with its hedges undulating in waves, it also resembles perhaps a lock entrance to one of the nearby docks. New housing is being built on the north side of the park, and there seems to be some debate about this in the local area, with concerns that it might make it harder to access and enjoy the park. So this is a reminder of the necessity in regeneration to strike a balance between the needs of existing residents and of those who might need to make a new home in the area. Down by the riverside, the park includes a pavilion of remembrance commemorating local people who died during the Second World War. And this is a very restful place to sit down and think for a bit. When you're ready to proceed, head to the southeast corner of the park, nearest to the Thames flood barrier, which you'll be able to see straddling the river. For as long as it's existed, London has faced the threat of flooding. A lot of the city, not just Silvertown, is built on what used to be marshland. A particular problem is storm surges, where a high tide coincides with storm winds pushing water from the North Sea up the Thames estuary. We have some photographs here showing how flooding impacted the Tate & Mell refinery downstream from here. These images show workers struggling to cope in 1948. And this is from a flood in 1957. The waters are about level with the bottom of the house's bay windows, suggesting that the ground floors of people's homes are flooded. And imagine how you'd feel if that was happening to your home every few years. Miraculously, it looks like the trains are still running, showing resilience that perhaps some train companies today might learn from. The North Sea flood of January 1953 was especially severe. In Silvertown, the Royal Docks overflowed and spilled into surrounding streets. The water then drained into the sewer system, causing the sewers themselves to overflow in nearby Canning Town. In this area there was only one tragic fatality, but dozens died in coastal locations elsewhere, notably Scotland, Suffolk and Essex. Over 30,000 people were made homeless. The following year, a government committee tasked with reporting on the flood suggested building a structure across the Thames that could block storm surges. The project had a long gestation, though it wasn't until 1966 that a decision was made to build a barrier across the Thames here between Silvertown and Charlton. Even then it took time for engineering solutions to be found and enabling laws to be passed before construction could start in 1974. This was what was on the site where the northern end of the barrier was constructed, Prince Regent's Wharf, the factory of Burton, Bolton and Hayward. This company acquired chemical byproducts from Beckton Gas Works, which is on the far side of the Royal Docks, and it used them to manufacture tar and disinfectants. The first trial of the completed barrier was performed in 1982. As part of the project, flood defences downstream were improved too, so the flooding we saw in those pictures of Tate and Lyle is much less likely today, even though that area isn't directly protected by the barrier. The closing of the barrier is a majestic sight as curved steel floodgates rotate upwards from their resting positions on the riverbed. Each of the 4 large central gates is over 20 metres tall and is made of 4 centimetre thick steel encasing a hollow space that fills with water when the gate is at rest beneath the surface, then empties out as the gate rises. Since its completion, the Thames flood barrier has been closed nearly 200 times, not including routine testing. The barrier was initially projected to close 2 or 3 times a year. During the present millennium, the figure has averaged at more than twice that, which is reflective of climate change, but the number does vary enormously from year to year. So between September 2013 and April 2014, the barrier closed 50 times, while in the same period a year later it closed just once. Current projections are that the barrier's working life will expire sometime in the 2060s. That seems a long way off, but considering that the structure took 28 years to make from concept to completion, it might be best to start designing a replacement now. Proposals are in fact being developed for new, much longer barriers that will span the Thames estuary and give greater protection to communities downstream from London. This is the conclusion of this section of our walk. If you'd like to continue directly to the third and last stage, head north along the eastern side of the park and in the northeast corner, take the footpath north. You'll emerge on Bramwell Way, which runs parallel to the DLR viaduct and North Woolwich Road. This is a good place for you to transition to the next video. If you prefer to head off via public transport, you could follow the same route and then turn left, following the viaduct back to Pontoon Dock Station. Alternatively, you could spend some more time relaxing in the park, then make your way to the station via one of the other exits. Thank you for joining me on this section of our guided walk, Making a Home in Silvertown. Thanks also to Newham Heritage Month and the Access and Engagement team at Birkbeck, University of London, for supporting the project. Please join me again for the third and final part of the walk, where we'll learn about the Royal Docks complex, the creation of London City Airport, and the lives and work of people in the eastern portion of Silvertown.